How do you do? My name is Ricardo Didone. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Children Now. Children Now is a non-profit organization with its prime interest the well-being of family, but especially our children. In the late spring of 2018, we had the privilege of playing host to some of the best minds in the field of family law and mediation. We held an international symposium entitled Working with Families in Transition in the 21st Century. During the symposium, many conferences were held addressing some of the most important issues regarding families. Expert social worker Gary Direnfeld addressed us in a very interesting conference about his experience as a consultant at Child Protection Services in their intervention with high conflict situation. Here's what he had to say.
I used to do a lot of custody and access assessments. I used to do parenting coordination. We're in the province of Ontario. That includes an arbitration function. I used to do mediation/arbitration. I used to do arbitration. And I think we've all seen that the intensity with which the clients we serve fight has escalated over the years, such that, when I started doing this work in the 1990s, you could turn to a person and say, why don't you do this? And they go, okay. They may not love it, but they'd still do it. And the lawyers would refer people to me, and there'd be no contract. By the time I stopped doing arbitration, the contract was 16 pages long and had no effect, and the handshake that I had in the 1990s had all effect. So just to mention the intensity, severity of issues that we're dealing with, and for me that culminated towards the end of 2014, where there was a series of it didn't feel good to do it anymore. So I opted out, and so all of my practice these days is directed towards what I and some of my other colleagues call peacemaking, which is more than mediation, more than collaborative law. It's more of a mindset towards one's work that says, if litigation really is off the table, what are the myriad of creative ways that we can bring people together to resolve conflict? So if you go to my website, yoursocialworker.com, and click on the link that says services and scroll through, you'll see that I offer, it's around 20 discrete services that if you want this, I can do this. If you want that, I can do that. So to help speak to people, because I think that's how they come to us. They don't think broadly. They think, I have this problem and I'm looking for this solution. And so the degree to which I've learned that we speak their language rather than having them speak ours, they can make better choices in terms of the process decisions. All right, so as to my presentation, high conflict consultation for child protection agencies. In the context of high conflict separation, we're seeing an increase of perhaps frivolous or vexatious reports to child protection agencies with respect to the other parent, and is it a legitimate report, or is it motivated to gain some sort of advantage in a custody access dispute? And so there are those clients that are frequent reporters of untoward behavior about the other person, and they frame everything from the perspective of child abuse. They're withholding the child, that's child abuse. They're not feeding them spinach, they're feeding them hot dogs, that's child abuse. They are drunk in the morning and can't get the kids off to school, that's child abuse. And so many of these things are presented with the same level of intensity, and it creates a challenge for the intake worker to discriminate and figure out what really is child abuse, what is a protection issue, how do we differentiate between domestic violence and high conflict, and what do we do with these frequent reporters? And to add to that problem, certainly in Ontario, a lot of the intake workers and a lot of the workers in child protection agencies, there's quite a churn in terms of worker. For a social worker, these are often entry jobs. into the helping profession, working in a child protection agency. So the level of knowledge, education, and experience of these workers tends to be less than certainly those of us in the room. And so this is the problem. The parents are generating referrals in the midst of their parenting disputes, and the worker has trouble differentiating and figuring out, is this, in a sense, a legitimate referral? And then there's the worker attributes, their training, education, and whatnot. So in Toronto, I'm trying to give you a history lesson here, and I don't have the dates in my head, but in Toronto, going back about 10 years ago, Howard Hurwitz, who was then a manager with Jewish Child and Family Services, also, seeing a lot of these high conflict issues within that child protection agency. He gathered a bunch of people together and said, we have common problems across our different sectors. So those of us who are lawyers, those of us who are in private practice, those of us who are other child protection workers. And he said, let's get together and let's pool our heads and resources and see if we can come up with some creative ways to understand what's going on, some educational opportunities for those of us in the field. And it was called the High Conflict Forum, the Toronto High Conflict Forum. And that spawned, and so there's several high conflict forums across the province of Ontario. And so I had started, I'd commute to Toronto. I live in Hamilton, an hour outside. I'd commute to Toronto because this was so unique at the time, and I wanted the opportunity to be part of that. And then it came to Hamilton, and it's not far from here. There's a group in Ottawa and a few other groups, to varying levels of success and longevity. But I've been immersed in trying to figure out this high conflict puzzle for at least the last 10 or 15 years or so as well. So, from that, in our high conflict forum in Hamilton, there's been the same, group of people who've gotten together for about the last 5 years, and one of them was a manager of services, of family services, for our local child protection agency. And so we formed a relationship, really great guy, Sean Chisholm, and he said, hey, what would be helpful for our agency is if you, Gary, would come in and do a monthly consultation. I said, that's great, Sean, but what your staff, what your workers really need is not just a consultation. It's, give somebody a fish, they eat for it the day, that concept, teach them to fish, they eat forever. I can do a consultation, but they really need training. And so if you can help them out with the training, maybe I can make myself redundant. Yeah. Why do we do that, by the way? I'd rather just sell you a fish. So he says there's no budget. There's no budget for training. I mean, the budgets in social services have just been decimated, at least in the province of Ontario. And from what I understand, there's nothing unique about that, but throughout North America. So I said, okay, let's do this high conflict consultation, but let's also use it as a backdoor educational opportunity. So rather than just the worker and supervisor coming to the table, why don't we open it up and make it available to whatever workers are available on the day, and they can sit in on the consultation. I'll have extra materials. We'll talk about whatever the case is. That's the case example. And we're using it not just as a consultation, but as an educational opportunity. And so that started 3.5, 4 years ago. And we've been doing roughly 6 a year, although we have planned for 10 a year. So we're meeting with the agency worker, supervisor, and manager. We're opening up the consultation as a training opportunity and sorting out the conundrum and offering guidance. It begins with the worker identifying a case. Who are they having trouble with? And typically, it's been those files where there have been frequent reports by one or both parents where they haven't been able to verify any bona fide untoward child abuse or protection issues per se. That worker writes a brief synopsis, and I'm really talking brief, so in an email, it doesn't take much space. It's a 4-member family, they separated at this time, there's 2 kids at these ages, and the current issues are, and they've been in and out for these reasons, always closed at intake. And so, the actual process, we're in the room now, and there could be anywhere from 4 to 6 or 8 persons, so those who are directly involved and those who are looking to take advantage of this as the educational opportunity. And then they do a case presentation. You know what this is like. We put the genogram up on the board and who's involved and what's been going on. And I'm forever trying to get them in their thinking to expand the thinking. Who else is involved and where else is involved and who's done what and what happens when, how do you know if, and do we know who some of the other players who haven't been put on the board yet? So getting them to expand the system. And as is not uncommon in these files, there's this thing in safe driving. I happen to have a lot of expertise in safe driving. Go figure, whole other story, another day. But the thing about safe driving, particularly crash avoidance, most people, when they're about to crash, they actually look at where they're crashing. And the thing about that is you steer where you're looking. And rather than crash avoidance, you are facilitating the crash. And it's the same thing in our work. People come in, they say this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, and they're driving us into the crash. So my role, our role, from my perspective as consultant, is to say, okay, that's the crash, but what's going well? Come on, throw some strengths at me. Who's doing something good here? It can't all be gloom and doom, because if we only go there, then litigation is the only option. We're going to find that scoundrel, and we're going to pound that scoundrel, whoever that may be. That's the frame of mind that winds up coming out of that. So what's going well? Where are they working with you? What are the positives in this? So we really want to, again, expand the thinking of the mind of the worker. So it's not all client-focused, but strength and positive-focused as well. And then, what are your concerns? You have to know that when these workers bring a file of this nature to us, forget what's going on with the file. They're universally anxious. They are worried. They are worried that somebody is going to die on their watch. They're going to worry that whatever happens is going to be a bad reflection on them. They're worried that they're going to screw it up. They're worried that they're going to get complaints about them. And so you have to know that when we operate from a place of fear, it can also impact our work and our development of options for dealing with things. So I want to hear what their concerns are. So I'm going to hear the worries, and apart from whatever they may try to present professionally, my worry for the client is, I go, what's your worry for you? Worst case scenario, what's your worry for you as well? So we do make it personal, but we make it a safe environment where they feel comfortable talking about these things as well, and I think we know what the skills are for that. And then with that, I'm going to present my views. Here's what I think is going on. Here's some of the things you may not have realized. Here's an educational component to that. And then we generate some alternatives. Here's some things that you may want to do differently in view of what the discussion has been. And then we end up with some feedback. Was this process helpful to you? How so? What might you do differently? And to me, that's always an important question. What might you do differently? Because it focuses them literally on doing something different. We all know the story. Do the same old, you'll have the same outcome. But over the 4 years, we put up a Survey Monkey brief kind of survey because we were wondering from some of the workers, is this at all helpful to you? You got to know, I'm a clinician. I had no control over the survey itself, and so I'm not presenting this as rigorous research. I'm just presenting this as, some questions were asked. These were the responses. All right? So what role did you play? Of the survey, 7 were presenting workers and 1 was the supervisor. How helpful was the format in meeting your needs? 8.25 out of 10, so it was helpful. And did the consultation generate alternate solutions? And 100% said yes. And did you implement any of the next steps? So we're trying to see what is the outcome, what is the effect of having had a consultation, apart from the feel-good nature of it, because it helps allay some of the anxiety in the moment for the worker. Now what's it going to do really in terms of the case management. And one was not yet, one was yes, one was planned to close, one is required a lot more involvement and heavy conversations, and wasn't overly, the client wasn't overly responsive to this, so it didn't happen, which, you know, we can't get deterred by that because not everything we do is helpful to everyone. We already know that. Yes, I was able to schedule time to meet with the mother and the children when they were at school, and she goes on, that was quite helpful with that. Another one was implementing more after more information is received from the community supports. And that was my expanding the system. There's so much more information. We don't even know what's going on until you get information from some of these sources. And here's the lucky one. Did you implement? It's no, I'm no longer the worker. And you know, how envious a position is that for someone on these files? Did the consultation offer you anything that you can apply to other cases? And so this is trying to check for an educational component. Am I presenting information in a way to the workers that they can generalize and apply it in other situations? And yeah, it gave some insights into other things to focus on the evidence of impact. And that's, you know, something that we know as workers here. What is the evidence of impact? It's one thing to say there's domestic violence, but if the kid's happy-go-lucky, resilient, and we don't see evidence of impact, then how big a deal is this necessarily? Is it being even reported accurately? So we're looking for evidence of impact, which is really important, particularly in a child protection context. And so would you bring another case in the future? And invariably, they all said yes. Now, I took a look at the files that I consulted to over the last couple of years, and I said, well, if I were to kind of categorize the outcomes, how would I categorize them? And so what was the guidance? And generally into three groups. It wasn't a child protection matter because there was no evidence, particularly of emotional harm. I mean, if it's an allegation of physical abuse, physical harm, and there is bruises, and there is marks, and there, you know what? Those cases still are, in a sense, I want to be careful with my use of language, but slam dunks in a child protection agency. They are evident on face value. But these are less evident on face value because nowhere are we going to see marks for half of the allegations that are made. And so then we have to look for evidence of emotional harm. And to help the worker understand what is evidence of emotional harm. You know, has it affected their life at school? Has it, you know, is this child distracted? Is this child behavioral? Is this child expressing bad feelings up to suicidal ideation? Is there self-harm associated with this child? And so, you know, to help them look for that kind of data, the evidence of emotional harm, and in a small number of cases, there was evidence or substantial risk of concern for emotional harm, as defined by the Child and Family Services Act, and that was a minority of cases. And in another small minority of cases, physical, emotional neglect or substance abuse was verified, and thus ongoing involvement was necessary. It was really interesting. In one file, dad was making all sorts of allegations about mom. He was generating the reports to the Children's Aid Society, and we put all the information on the board, and the worker was so focused on that tick bite and all the complaints that once we started putting a whole bunch more data on the board, I turned to the workers and I said, like, do you not know what these are the risk indicators for? And they're like, I don't know if they were in a fog or overwhelmed by everything else we were talking about. I said, these are all the risk indicators for childhood sexual abuse. And so, you know, in that file, it was quite a reframe of the concern. And, you know, if one parent is saying and doing this, what kind of smoke screen might it create for what may be going on alternately over there? And so these consultations proved, you know, very fruitful, very helpful. Typically in a child protection agency, and because the workers I've worked with anyways, tended to be younger, less experienced, they're coming to this wanting to do good, wanting to help everyone cooperate. And so that was another theme underneath virtually all of these referrals. And so to try and get everyone to cooperate, they're engaging. And it's just the antithesis of what we know to be helpful in working with high conflict separated parents. So to help them with the paradigm shift that is important in this work from engagement to disengagement, and I do see that as a paradigm shift for those of us involved, I would spend a lot of time talking about that. Because that's the, if I can teach you how to fish, so many of the interventions can fall from that. So if we understand that we're no longer to engage this couple to collaborate, work together, but we're to, there to help them to disengage, that can provide a frame of reference for the child protection worker to intervene differently on behalf of this family rather than trying to get them to collaborate and work together. Thank you for your time.
Well, a nice hand of applause
Thank you.
for Mr. Direnfeld. Please take some time to view all our conferences and interviews of the 2018 International Symposium. Visit our site, childrennow.ca. Repeat, www.childrennow.ca.